morning. All right, well, we're going to do just a quick 20 minutes on the next 5 years of BPM. This movie, he's up there, he's banging on there saying, Elaine, Elaine. He drives to Santa Barbara for the wedding. It actually wasn't filmed in Santa Barbara, it was in LA. But the whole wedding scene, it was kind of the apex of the movie. Happening here in Santa Barbara, in theory. But remember, there was another scene that preceded that, where he's given advice. He's told just one word. It's a P word. Movie? Plastics. That's right. Process. Process. Well, in the mid-20th century, it was plastics. And plastics were transformative because we switched from being reliant upon natural resources. If you wanted to make a product that kind of looked like plastic, you had to kill an endangered species and use a tusk or something. But when we moved to plastics, then we had control. We could have design-driven innovation. We could make whatever we wanted. So plastics really unleashed this incredible innovation and incredible growth in the economy. What we're facing now, the 21st century, is, sure, it's software, but really it's process. If you were to pull young Benjamin aside and talk about where he should be thinking, you wouldn't just say software in the way you wouldn't say, hey, you should have a digital strategy. Well, yeah, okay, of course. But it's about how we take that and mold that and apply innovation to that. So ultimately, in the same way that plastics gave us that shift, it's the shift from physical to digital managed by process. So when we look at the most successful companies in the world, and Tesla is without question the most successful car company in the world of their market cap, which is extraordinary. I mean, when you look at the growth relative to sales compared to how the other car companies evolved, there's never been a car company, and there's not been many companies like Tesla that have evolved so quickly and been so successful. Now, that has them at a $32 billion market cap. Market cap's not the only measure of success, but for a publicly traded company, it's pretty decent and pretty important measure of success. But Tesla, as a car company, is ultimately a software company. And that was why they were said that they wouldn't succeed. They said they don't have the car, auto manufacturing engineering behind them. That's never going to work. I remember I worked with Sun and Toyota. Toyota is the biggest car company in the world. At the time, they were the most successful car company in the world. And they did a partnership with Sun where they said, a little less than 15 years ago, they said the market for cars is going to shift to be just like the software market. And they said the business model or the market's going to be driven by software, but the business model is going to be like the cell phone market. That ultimately, as a manufacturer, we're going to be providing something that is just a way to convey services that we'll provide. And it never worked for Toyota because they're a car company. And they apply the rigor that you do as a car company. But with a Tesla, the best features of the Tesla ship in beta. Can you imagine another car company where something like auto steer is beta? That mentality would never work. But in fact, that is with Tesla. And when you bring your Tesla home every night, it gets better. It's actually uploading, it's connecting to the network, it's uploading and it's getting better. Because that's the software business model. But ultimately, the way that we are going to leverage this is through process. And this is the charter for the BPM market today, and this is why the BPM market is going to be so important over the next 5 years. You could not have gone to a conference last year without seeing this quote in one form or another. This started as a piece that came out in TechCrunch early on, and it became pretty important. It was obviously the takeaway here is around digital disruption, and they go through and talk about companies, these mega brands that have disrupted their counterparts in the physical world by having basically a digital business model. So Uber doesn't own its own cars, Facebook doesn't own its own content, Alibaba doesn't own its inventory. All the things that bog down 21st century business models have been liberated by these digital disruptors. And the point from TechCrunch, and generally the way this is presented, is that the battle is around the interface. It's around capturing that customer. And all of these companies have that in common. They also have in common, just like Tesla, they are software companies per se. They have software engineers that are driving the innovation behind these companies. But looking just at the front end, while that's important, it really misses the point. Because it's not just the front end innovation. It's about the fact that the relationship is what the interface is. So the battle is not for the interface. The battle for the customer is the interface. And that interface is not defined as a thing. It is largely today. But increasingly, it's not defined as a thing. That's a point I'm going to come back to. But it's where these disruptors are working is that they are stealing your customers. If you're not one of these digital natives, if you have customers, they're going after your customers. And they're using infrastructure that somebody else has built, somebody else's investment has enabled, but by layering innovation on that. Obviously, there's a fair amount of investment in R&D that goes into these companies. These are now real companies. I saw not too long ago Uber's new headquarters. It's like 1 million square feet. It's an extraordinary headquarters. There's got to be some shadow space there. But they are real companies that are building real things. But the way that they have ascended so quickly is by leveraging the infrastructure that somebody else built and somebody else has the burden of maintaining. So ultimately, it's how you leverage through that defines interface. For what this means for BPM. These are two metaphors that actually I introduced last year, or used these particular pictures last year. It's the movement from the picture on the left, which is defined largely what BPM has been about for the first half of its life as an industry. It's about creating scalability through, but knowing how you're going to get there, not worrying so much about what's going on. So the boxes that over the conveyor belts, the BPM system, just like this conveyor belts, it has no real awareness of what's happening there. Unlike the Kiva system. Everybody knows what company Kiva is. So Kiva was a Massachusetts robotics company. It was one of the first forays, a digital company into robotics, and it seemed like kind of an interesting play at the time. But they've built differentiation around how well they manage and turn around their what's happening in the warehouse. And they do that because the robots certainly know what's in the payload. The robots know the goals, they know the rules, and they have a fair amount of autonomy to be able to make decisions. So they actually optimize over time where they put stuff and able to get that out faster. So when we look at the shift BPM, it's to being truly data-driven, of knowing what's inside the package, and to connect that data to goals, to be able to be constantly optimizing, and to be able to be adaptive. So not simply to focus on horizontal scalability, where we define the best process and we repeat that process, and we know that the role that BPM system is playing is to ensure that process happens the same way every time. Instead, to say that we know the milestones, we know the goals, but we know that there's going to be happen along the way that we have to adjust to. And the BPM system is able to take our rules and take data, decision, and pathway at that time. So ultimately, what this is allowing us to do, and the word anathema in the BPM space forever was automation. We're not about automation. Automation meant doing it the not intelligent way. defining a workflow, and whether that was the right way or not, simply following that path. And we've all dealt with scenarios of poorly designed automation, far more frustrating than simply doing it manually. What BPM now is allowing us to do is really to expand the envelope of what can be automated by applying intelligence and that adaptability in real time. So I had made this pronouncement for the first time, this event last time, and nothing I've seen over the course of 2015 has contradicted this, but has just galvanized my belief that the 3 R's are what's going to define BPM from 16 and beyond. Robots, rules, and relationships. Robots and ultimately smart things that are out generating event streams and data. Rules and decisioning, not coincidentally, this year we have a 500% increase in sessions focused on decisioning, DMN, and rules. This has become one of the most critical aspects of the BPM market. And again, about relationships. BPM is a framework for making these connections, managing these relationships. I don't mean in the sense that, well, BPM is like a CRM system. That's just data. It's how that data is used to be able to manage that interaction with customers and continue that relationship. As we were driving here, we took probably the road that Benjamin would have taken in the graduate, kind of the back roads as we were going through agricultural areas. And we saw the agriculture that is in season now is strawberries. So they're out picking strawberries. Has anybody had local strawberries? Scott? A few? You may not want to, in that you'll never be able to eat another strawberry again. Back east, our strawberries, they taste like little balls of sawdust compared to the strawberries here. Strawberries are just phenomenal. So we're driving, Heather, myself, and our kids, and we're seeing people picking out there, and we're saying, gosh, you know, that's very hard work. And we're talking with the children, and you know, they seem to have an appreciation for that. And we said, thank goodness that they'll do that, because you know, we love the strawberries. And it was one of those moments where, as a parent, you could say, well, you know, this is why you study hard and you work hard, because that is a very hard job, and you don't want to do that. That's not the path I took in this case. I said, you know, by the time you're working, people won't be picking strawberries. Only robots will pick strawberries. And my kids said, how do you know that? And I said, well, because I know robots, which they know because I've been spending a lot of time with robots lately and going to robot industry forums. And so they said, okay, well, we know that you've been talking about robots a lot. Heather was a little more incredulous, so she said, no, I don't believe that. How's a robot going to know how you pick the right strawberry? How's it going to know which strawberry is better than the other? And that was the right question. Heather's been spending some time with me. The fact is, and so I didn't know that robots actually would pick strawberries, but I have a high degree of confidence in things like that. So when we got back, I looked and I said, yes, absolutely. There's a whole new range of research and innovation around strawberry picking by robots. And it's following the path that I was convinced for why they would be doing it, is that robots increasingly will learn. And the robots are subject to the same dynamics of software-driven innovation. For the history of robotics, it's all been about mechanicals. And for that reason, while it's a century-old industry, it's right now in this incredible inflection point where it's affecting everything. And it's because of the dynamic of software and the fact that when a robot today, 10 years ago could not do this, but today, when it picks that strawberry that's the perfect strawberry, it knows all the circumstances around that. In fact, they now have some microwave interfaces that you can't see in this arm that goes in front of it, and there's all sorts of sensory around exactly the right amount of pressure to put to know when that strawberry, not just when it's picked, but even when it's consumed. What is the right way to do it? What is the best strawberry? Right now, so for strawberries, it's probably a few years away, although they are in the fields. For lettuce, they're already there. A robot is 20 times more effective at harvesting lettuce because the way that lettuce is grown, and up north, and east of here is the lettuce capital of the world. Something like 80% of the world's lettuce comes from here. The way that you get lettuce is you plant 3 plants. You have 3 potential lettuce heads, and you remove 2 of them because only one of them will be the best. And that's been one of the challenges, is to have a labor force that can do that effectively and still be the type of labor force that's willing to spend their career picking lettuce. The farmer doesn't do that because it's an extremely manual activity. So they've come up with all sorts of rules and SOPs and ways that you do it. You can never get it right. A robot can do it perfectly, consistently, every time. One robot is exactly as smart as every other robot that's in that process, that's in that network. And that's why in these things, we'll never beat robots. I mean, that's why we're seeing this incredible growth in the role of automation. But it's connecting robots to the processes. Having just a robotic automated lettuce picker, there's great innovation around that for lettuce, but it's how we connect it to otherwise human-intensive tasks. So does anybody recognize that picture from perhaps flying in? Depends on what airport you came in. What's that? Oakland? Looks like Oakland. Oakland is a similar port of entry like this. This is much bigger than Oakland, though. This is the port of Los Angeles, and which continues to Long Beach. So it's the largest and most active in the world. It's increasingly the point of entry for food that's consumed in the United States. Despite the fact that we're the largest agricultural producer in the world, we're also the largest agricultural importer. And a significant amount of that goes to this particular point of entry. And an interesting thing about that, there's a couple of things going on. One, this is right now the subject of the largest investment in automation in the history of the world. The other is it's been the subject of the largest BPM initiative in probably the history of the world. Now, I have the distinction of being involved in the largest, least successful BPM initiatives in the world. I know how that sounds. But, in fact, they're one and the same. These mega large BPM initiatives also happen to have been the least successful. And this one has been an interesting study. So while this has been, and it's specifically around the coordination of food safety inspection for the Port of Los Angeles, there is a congressional mandate based on lots of failure in food safety. We have rampant cases of outbreaks, foodborne illness outbreaks. So there's a congressional mandate to do 250,000 inspections per year. That's a tiny fraction of the amount of food that goes through here. The most they've ever been able to accomplish is 80,000. It's a pretty scary consideration when you think that the vast majority, and the margin of food that comes in is what's called semi-processed and unprocessed, basically raw food that comes through here not being inspected. We'll never be able to inspect it. And we have a horrible track record of being able to ensure safety on it. So the only way that we're going to solve that problem, and we applied BPM to that problem, and it was all around how do we optimize what we look at, how do we get inspectors to that point, and there's a myriad set of goals and regulations that we need to follow. And that's what BPM is great at, being able to connect actions, tasks, to goals, to policies, to objectives. But we can't do the actual work with human beings alone. We've got to be able to bring into that effectively robots, smart things, and they have literal robots that are working there. There are tiny microscopic robots that are essentially sensors that have a little bit of intelligence on them that all participate in the process. So the only way we're going to solve this food safety mission is through BPM. And this is what that BPM should look like. If your BPMS architecture doesn't look like this, probably okay. Let's talk about it offline. But I will guarantee you that this is what BPM is going to look like. This is the future-proof model of BPM. My personal guarantee until at least 2020. And that it has things that that are there today. We can go, we can talk, we can look at examples for this. It's not an argument for whole product strategy. You don't have to have every BPMS that has this, but when you're deploying a BPMS, it's got to be able to bring these things in. Starting from the left, the ability to define goals and to have a goal-seeking capability. So in that food safety mission, every day they should be working towards a whole series of goals, and they have those. They have KPIs, but it's not connected to the process. It's connected to people looking at things and giving reports and doing things. But we have the ability with BPM to constantly adjust what we're doing based on reaching that goal. The other is being able to take and make sense of event streams. We can't take the billions of data points from sensors and apply that directly to BPM or apply that directly to rules. What we can do is apply that to the ability to extract processes and apply those processes to rules and ultimately to automated tasks and workflow. So being able to create this closed loop where we're pulling in event stream data, applying that to goals, extracting the patterns, applying that to decisions and policy, and ultimately to manage tasks and manage workflow. The other way that robots are coming into to process and into our lives is how the concept of the interface is changing. On Sunday, I had dinner with a couple of friends. One of them is kind of a classic Silicon Valley executive, and the other one runs the County Bowl, which is a great concert venue here in town. The first friend said, you know, it's funny, based on having an iPhone, I've become so intolerant of other businesses that I used to think were pretty effective. And he picked out Federal Express. He says, they're a mess. I used to think that was what they did was great, but now that I have an iPhone, my expectations have totally changed. I said, that's a great point. I said, that same shift in your expectations is why you're not going to be satisfied with your iPhone much longer. I said, in fact, I'm going to throw out an idea. In 5 years, smartphone goes away. And he goes, really, that's interesting. He goes, what's going to take its place? I said, there's a whole new set of interfaces and interactions that you're going to have, and you're going to become increasingly intolerant to going back to try and do all that stuff through the iPhone when you have another way to go to it directly. He thought about it. He said, so like when I call an Uber, I'm going to use some IoT device? I thought, oh, damn, got me. First example right out of the gate. Other friend goes, hey, that's interesting. Because at the county bowl, we found Uber didn't work. We would have thousands of people coming out calling Uber in this tiny little space, and it became a disaster. And Uber was not smart enough to figure out based on the phone where anybody was. So what we've done instead is we've incorporated as part of their process an actual concierge service where as a concert goer, you're able to sign up for an Uber, and they do some basic intermediation of that and coordination of that. They stage all the Ubers nearby, they come through, and it says, it works amazing. Now everybody wants to take an Uber. We've totally changed the concert-going experience. But you couldn't have done it with an iPhone. I thought, my God, thank you. Saved right there. And in fact, all the interactions, or a large number of interactions, smartphone's not going to go away, per se. But the idea that we're going to do everything through the smartphone does go away. So the idea of the interface being a thing goes away. The interface is things. If your focus now is a mobile-first strategy, as we've seen the last several years, and obviously mobile has been incredibly disruptive. If it's mobile-first, you're already planning for a legacy. That we need to think in terms of the interface as being a whole set of things. And ultimately, we have to redefine the concept of work and the task. And this is what software has to go through. But really, this is the charter for BPM. BPM has figured these problems out. When I say BPM, we, as an industry, we've figured out these issues around how do we manage tasks. The next step in that is to start decomposing the task and think of it in terms of various interactions. Just quickly talking through these things. There's a whole set of new interfaces that are coming into our businesses and into our homes that are going to be just as disruptive to expectations as what was the mobile phone. The Amazon Echo, does anybody have the Amazon Echo? Yeah. Do you like it? So when you get to the point of being able to speak out and call for something, right now it's probably relatively limited in what it can do. But when you've got things that are right there waiting for you to give it a command, the idea that you're instead going to pull out a phone, pull up an app, go through the clumsiness of that interface. In some cases you will, but more and more there'll be things that are disrupting that. I was giving a talk on robotics and talking about how interaction, how robots themselves are becoming interfaces. And this company came up and said, well, let's show you what we're doing. It's a company based in Korea, and they've outfitted a whole series of banks in China where the bank is an autonomous robot that is certainly connected to the network based in malls. So there's no physical presence other than the robot, and you're doing all your interaction through this. Jibo is the other end of the spectrum, a multi-purpose home robot, but it's an interface. So how you interact with these interfaces and how ultimately, from a customer standpoint, this is where your expectations are going to be headed. From the standpoint of how you support your customers and ultimately how you support your employees, in the same way there's going to be a very thin distinction between the kind of interaction you have at home and the kind of interaction you have with processes in the office. So for BPM, we're starting to see this, and we need to continue down the re-envisioning of the actual interface to move away from the three-tier architecture. Whether it's a four-tier architecture, I conveniently stole this last year from Forrester, who introduced the idea of the four-tier architecture. It's an n-tier architecture, regardless. But the distinction here is being able to separate interaction, the actual client, from delivery, so that you're able to deliver services that's appropriate for the environment that you're working in. And ultimately, to be able to have those not only be native to that environment, but to be sensitive to the context of that work, so that it's not about a work list metaphor as it is various streams of interaction. So, again, I will say, for 2016 and beyond to 2020, the greatest challenge for BPM and the opportunity for BPM is how we integrate rules, relationships, and robots in the broad sense of new intelligent devices that are going to be playing larger and larger roles in our workforce that have to be part of the process. So it's around enabling this data-driven orientation of knowing what's in the payload and knowing the context of work, being able to connect that to goals, making that adaptive, expanding the envelope of automation, and from a usability and UX standpoint, getting away from the work list metaphor that still even really defines a lot of web apps, or not simply web apps, of course, but mobile apps, but really understand it in terms of it being streams of interaction. It's around managing that relationship and preparing for the end of the smartphone, or at least the end of the dominance of the smartphone. Having a mobile-first strategy is not going to cut it. You've got to be able to have a contextual relationship and interaction pattern for work. So I'm going to end there, and we're going to talk about automation with Neil.